Boxy. We're live. Hi, I'm Larry Harnish, and this is Boxy. Boxy is the Los Angeles Times, Boxy is the Los Angeles County District Attorney's files in the Black Dahlia case. Aren't you Boxy? And this is the monthly Ask Me Anything on George Hodel and Steve Hodel for August 2025. Welcome, new people. If there are any, I've gotten some more new subscribers recently. Thank you. Welcome. And a couple of little technical announcements. First of all, I have a new microphone. Let me know if it's working. The old microphone did not leave willingly. The new microphone and the old microphone fought like this. Finally, the new microphone won. I also have a ring light. Can you tell? And man, this thing is bright. Okay, but enough from the behind the scenes stuff. I have a new microphone. It should be a heck of a lot better than the one that's built into the webcam. It does cut out occasionally on Zoom. So if it cuts out, let me know. Okay, great. Thank you, Spins. And hey, Joyce. And yeah, so I'm going to get started. This is the monthly Ask Me Anything on George Hodel and Steve Hodel. So by way of introduction, I'm Larry Harnish. Who is this Larry Harnish guy? I'm Larry Harnish, 34 years in journalism, 27 at the Los Angeles Times. I was mostly a copy editor. I was also a feature writer. I wrote feature stories. I wrote columns off and on. I did a lot of blog posts, all on LA history. That was my specialty, was Los Angeles history, specifically looking at Hollywood myths, Los Angeles myths, and kind of, well, what's the real story on that? I began on the Black Dahlia case in 1996 for a story about the 50th anniversary that was published in January 1997. And that's the thumbnail biography of who is this Larry Harnish guy. Why do I do the Ask Me Anything? Here's the answer. For more than 20 years, I would talk to anybody with a microphone and a camera. Okay. You want to talk about the Black Dahlia case? Come on down. We'll talk. Great. I thought it was my obligation to set the record straight on the Black Dahlia case, and as much as was possible. And it became clear it's been a couple of years now, it became clear that nobody really wanted the record set straight on the Black Dahlia case. They wanted the regurgitation of the usual suspects and that kind of thing. And the deteriorating quality of the content, but especially the production values. If you're sitting at home watching a true crime show, you have no idea how many corners these production companies cut. It's shocking just what shoestring productions they are. Anyway, I decided I don't want any more part of it. I don't do any more interviews. It's just a hard no. And recently, well, as a matter of fact, a couple days ago, I got a request from somebody. Hi, from a fellow writer. I get requests from fellow writers occasionally. I got a request from a fellow writer. Hi, I'm doing a book on, not the Black Dahlia, but another case from that year. And, do you happen to have the district attorney's files on this case? And because the district attorney is being a jerk and they won't let me have the files. And I said, well, I don't know. It's like, you really should get them from the district attorney. That's their job. But the district attorney just stonewalled this writer who has a contract, apparently, is writing a book for a known publisher. And so, it's like, well, are you willing to share your files with me? And I said, no. I had to think about it a lot. And I said, no, why not? The answer is, I don't want to feed the true crime beast anymore. And it is a beast. The last Black Dahlia book that came out by Eli Frankel, it's ridiculous. His suspect was cleared at the time. the guy didn't. It was Carl Balsiger. Didn't do it. There's a forthcoming book by a guy named William Mann. It won't be published until January. He started out saying, well, I'm not going to try to solve the case. Then he solves the case. Then he backs up and says, oh, well, maybe I didn't solve it. And you will probably read that the book is well researched simply because he's got a lot of information. He has amassed a lot of information, but his interpretation of it is very iffy. And his guy was eliminated. It says right in here, which he's got, the guy was cleared. The guy was eliminated. And so I'm not saying who it is, but it's like it's one of the usual suspects. If you look at, it's like a game of Clue. If you look at the usual suspect, he's on there. He was cleared. He didn't do it. So I don't want to feed the true crime beast. The quality just keeps going down and down, and I just don't want to be part of it. So that's why I don't do interviews. This is it. This is all I do. I don't do podcasts. I don't, this is it. And this is all it. So that's the answer to why I do the Ask Me Everything. Okay. So what are we going to talk about? What am I going to talk about this time? Since it's almost fall, it's late August, back to school, I thought it would be good to do sort of an introduction to Black Dahlia Avenger 101, pointing out that everything that people think they know about George Hodel, the evil genius, it all comes from Steve. 95% of what people think they know about George Hodel comes from one source, and that source is Steve Hodel. Steve has spent the last 22 years since publication of OG, Black Dahlia Avenger. Since this book was published in 2003, Steve has tirelessly worked to present his father as a genius serial killer, starting it now in his teenage years, 50 killings in 50 years, and all these unsolved murders. They're all dead. So I'm going to do a little bit of a Steve Hodel 101. Okay. Who is Steve Hodel? He will tell you, and he's right about this. He's a retired LAPD homicide detective. He retired. I think he joined the department, I think in the early 60s and retired in the 80s. Went up to I think it was he went up to Washington and worked as a private detective for various defense attorneys. That is a pretty common career track for retired detectives. He was a homicide detective in Hollywood Division, worked a number of cases. I think his most famous case was the Rodney Alcala, the dating game killer. He was involved in that. But he worked a lot of cases, and but he'd always wanted to be a writer. There's a story where there's a newspaper story where he attended a conference. I think it was a Sherlock Holmes conference or a mystery writing conference, something like. And his mom was a writer, and so I think Steve, in the back of his mind, always wanted to be a writer. So he publishes Black Dahlia Avenger, this book, OG, in 2003. The setup is this. Retired homicide detective discovers dead dad is serial killer. His father, George Hodel, dies, I think it was 1999. And Steve's going through dead dad stuff, finds these photographs, and decides, oh, they're Elizabeth Short. And let's see, does the book fall open to it? Anyway, you've seen them all over the place. Let's see, the book used to fall open. Oh, wait a minute. It's in here. So anyway, yeah, sorry. Anyway, he finds these, you've seen him everywhere. He finds these pictures in his dead dad stuff, and he says, oh, that's Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia. Well, they're not Elizabeth Short. No. They are two random women, neither of whom are Elizabeth Short. But Steve will dance all around the question of the photographs. But the foundation for everything is that he finds these photographs in his dead dad stuff. They're Elizabeth Short. No, they're not. Who says so? Elizabeth Short's family says that's not her. Okay. It's that simple. So that's the foundation of everything. And he publishes, he does all his research in private, in secret, um, and publishes this book. Doesn't want anybody to know. Nobody in the family knew what he was doing, and publishes this book. And it is kind of a bombshell. Certainly within the Hodel family, there's a lot of bad blood in the Hodel family over Black Dahlia Avenger. And so that's kind of how Steve Hodel got going. Now, the character, and Steve has gone on to write this one and this one. This one is particularly, this one is where he says Dad is Zodiac. No, Dad isn't Zodiac. No. But anyway, so that's kind of the origin story of Steve Hodel and how he got started. He's gone on and written, I think, 2 plays. He wrote a play a while ago, and then he's got another play out, and then he's got a couple of books out about his dad's early years. And at this point, George Hodel, the George Hodel that people think they know, is it's a fictional character. Steve has slowly gathered more and more killings and attributed them to his dad. And nobody, there's very little pushback to this, except for me and a couple other people. Nobody pushes back. And so that's kind of where Steve is now. Again, this is, he will tell you, he will tell you a lot of things that are in this parallel reality. He will tell you that his dad was suspected of killing his secretary. No, his secretary committed suicide. That didn't happen. He will tell you that he grew up in the Sowden house. No, he didn't grow up there. His parents divorced, and he lived with his mom and his brothers. That didn't happen either. None of that Steve world is really true. It's all, at this point, it's all fictional. And Steve has gotten to the point where he's really off the deep end. He has gotten fixated on the idea that various victims' bodies were placed on certain streets or in certain locations to conform to a map as clues. He will tell you, for example, that Elizabeth Short's body which was famously left on Norton Avenue. He will tell you that it was left on Degnan, which is a couple of streets away. Now, why would Steve say that? Well, there was a killing the previous year of a little girl named Suzanne Degnan. And Steve desperately wants the killings of Suzanne Degnan in 1946 and the killing of Elizabeth Short in 1947 to be related. And so he has gone so far as to say, well, Norton and Degnan are the same street. Or he started saying Elizabeth Short's body was left off Degnan. Now he's gotten to say, well, Norton and Degnan are the same street and she was left on Degnan. It really is a parallel world that he has created for himself. And there are other examples. The Jean French killing, he moves the street where her body was found as well. It's really wild. Anyway, that's kind of who Steve Hodel is. He has written any number of, there's like countless updates of Black Dahlia Avenger. This is one of them. This is kind of an interesting story. OG Black Dahlia Avenger. Steve accused his dad of killing James Ellroy's mother, Geneva Ellroy. And James Ellroy's original attitude was, and I quote, "Fuck Steve Hodel," because it's James Ellroy. By the time that the paperback version rolled around, James Ellroy, notice, forward by James Ellroy. So, yeah. So Steve Hodel, Ellroy went from "fuck Steve Hodel" to, "Oh, Steve, let me write the foreword to your book." And now Ellroy doesn't talk about Steve Hodel. He won't talk about me. He won't talk about Steve Hodel, and he will not discuss the Black Dahlia case. So that's James. Anyway, that's kind of where that's kind of an introduction to that. Now, again, very briefly, the George Hodel character that everybody thinks they know is from it's mostly fictional. George Hodel was a smart kid. He was an only child. His parents were pretty well to do. His dad was a speculator and financier, whatnot. George was kind of indulged as a kid. Um, he graduated. He had a pretty high IQ, certainly not as high as Steve Hodel says, but nonetheless, he had a pretty high IQ. He was part of the Lewis Terman test. He was one of the termites, and so that material is all online if you know where to look, and you can see what his responses were. Anyway, he graduated early from high school. He went to Caltech for a year and then kind of dropped out or whatever. Eventually went up to the Bay Area, graduated from college, went to medical school, graduated from medical school, got married, regardless of what Steve says about it being a common law marriage. He got married, had a couple of kids. He had a son, Duncan. George Hodel was married a lot and had a lot of kids. It's hard to keep them all straight. He had a son, Duncan. Went to New Mexico and was a public health doctor there for a while. Came back to Los Angeles, opened a practice here. His specialty was not surgery. His specialty was VD, sexually transmitted diseases, that kind of thing. And so that's what he did. He worked in the VD sector of the county health department. And he quit that job. And Steve will tell you that, well, Dad bought this Sowden house befitting a man of his position. Now, he had quit the health department by the time he moved into the Sowden house. And again, Steve didn't grow up in the Sowden house. His parents were divorced. He didn't live there. Regardless of how many times Steve talks about the glittery parties with the who's who of Hollywood and none of that happened. He was living with his mom and his brothers. And the mom, Dorothy, who was John Huston's ex-wife, kept getting busted for child neglect. So we know that Steve wasn't living at the Sowden house. Anyway, George, from a relationship, has a daughter, Tamar. And Tamar is a problem child from day one. She's an incorrigible teenager. Regardless of what you hear elsewhere, she was an incorrigible teenager. The mom's finally at her wit's end and says, I'm sending your ass down to live with your dad, young lady. And so that's what she does. And Tamar comes down to Los Angeles immediately. You know, she doesn't want to be in Los Angeles. George Hodel is living the swinging single life. He doesn't want this incorrigible teenage girl around. So it didn't go well. She made up a story that she had been molested. And I'm not going to get into all of that. It's very complicated. Anyway, the upshot of that, there was a trial. He was found not guilty. The jury was mainly women. I should point out that it was either 8 women and 4 men or 9 women and 3 men, none of whom believed her. There was a whole parade of witnesses that said Tamar was a liar. The mom, the grandmother, various other women, they all say, no, we wouldn't even believe her under oath. So George Hodel is exonerated. But, and this is where Boxey comes in, they knew that whoever killed Elizabeth Short had medical knowledge, the way she was cut in half. And so they looked at anybody with a medical background who'd been accused of a sex crime, which is how we get George Hodel, which is how we get Dr. Patrick S. O'Reilly. He too had a medical background and was accused of a sex crime. So they looked at anybody. They bugged George Hodel's house for 5.5 weeks. They didn't find anything, and they pulled up stakes and left. But George's reputation was so trashed from this trial, even though he was found not guilty, that he couldn't get a job. He was not at the health department anymore. He'd quit the health department years before. And so he had to go all the way to Hawaii to find anybody who would hire him. And so he ultimately reinvented himself. He lived in Hawaii, then he went in the Philippines, had another family, all of whom are pissed at Steve about allegations in Black Dahlia Avenger. Ultimately came back to San Francisco, kind of established a relationship with Steve, and then he died. And so that's the quick thumbnail of George Hodel. And I think at that point, I could go on a lot more, but I think at that point, it's good to start taking questions. So let's see, what do we got here? Once you start have you read Black Dahlia 4, and how does he have enough material to make all these volumes? Well, he makes stuff up. I have not read Black Dahlia 4. I think he's got the early years. Black Dahlia 5 is That's a play. My understanding is it's a play where it's a mock trial of his dad, and it's really wild. It's really wild stuff that says a lot about Steve. You know, um, Steve says a lot of things. It's hard to keep track of everything that he says. I don't know it all. I've listened to a lot of his podcasts. I know what he says. I did read Black Dahlia Avenger when it came out. I fact checked that. So I know that this one, the Zodiac stuff is, oh, please. But Steve writes constantly. He's got a couple of books called The Early Years that deal with the 1920s and the 1930s. And then he will do other books sort of tangential. There's one, he titled it In the Mesquite. I call it In the Weeds. And that's a famous unsolved murder in, I believe it was Texas. That, of course, Dad did that one too. So it is, the thing about Steve is that he knows his case is weak, and he has to keep finding more and more clues and more evidence. And that's really the bottom line. And Steve also has various enablers that do his research for him. Steve is not a detail person. I can tell you from fact checking Steve, he's horrible with details. But anyway, no. So I haven't read Black Dahlia 4. Steve seems to think that all you need to do is read his books and you will accept everything. And it's hard going. This was a challenge. If you know anything about Los Angeles history, and if you know anything about the Black Dahlia case, this is a tough go from the very beginning, from chapter 1 of this book. Okay, from chapter 1 of Black Dahlia Avenger. It has Elizabeth Short. First of all, it's got her in the lobby of the current lobby of the Biltmore, which didn't exist in 1947. That's one of the problems. The other one is the first chapter is listing, the LAPD was really experienced with Hollywood. It handled all these cases like Fatty Arbuckle. What? Fatty Arbuckle was famously San Francisco. That was not an LAPD case at all. I mean, if you know anything, you read this stuff and it's like, good grief, how did he make these kind of mistakes? So now, I've listened to the podcast. I've read enough. Anyway, why are most evil and Black Dahlia Avenger divided into 2 series if they're all about Hodel? I don't know. That's a question for Steve. Steve, I think Steve, my bottom line is this. I think Steve wrote Black Dahlia Avenger as a scam. He knew it was a scam. He knew those pictures weren't Elizabeth Short, but for whatever reason, he decided, well, there's a book in that. And I think when this one sold pretty well, got him a lot of attention. I think Steve got hooked on the attention and the public feedback and the acclaim. And he just kept writing books. He's like an addict. He keeps writing books. I think Steve will keep writing books indefinitely. I mean, as I said, the last one was a play. And you look at the rankings on Amazon and these books are tanking. But, why he does that? Why did he do In the Weeds, In the Mesquite as a separate book? If it's all part of the same thing, I don't know. Did George Hodel's father originally own the Sowden house? I don't know. That's a great question. I have wondered the same thing. George Hodel Sr., you have to remember George Hodel was George Hodel Jr., and he often went by G. Hill Hodel. He didn't identify himself as George Hodel Jr. George Hodel Sr. was a fairly wealthy guy, and he did end up his wife died. Steve's mom died. No, George's mom died. Beg your pardon. George's mom died. And George's dad moved into the Sowden house and got remarried. And they were living, the first trace of the Hodels living at the Sowden house was not George at all. It was George Sr. Living at the Sowden house. That's it. And people look at the Sowden house the way it looks today. That's after $1 million remodel. It didn't look like that. The Sowden house at that point had been a rental It was beat up. You'd had all kinds of, you'd had a theater company in there. You had a vocal teacher in there who was renting rooms to his voice students. It is like in every way in public records, it behaves like a rental where you've got people in and out of there every 2 years. And George Hodel Jr., Steve's dad, only got in there in the late 40s. Let's see. Okay. I got a submitted question here. Let me answer that. Do you believe any of the letters sent to the press police were genuine? Well, Steve Hodel does. Steve Hodel has hung everything, the Black Dahlia Avenger, off of this mail that was sent to the papers. What am I talking about? Okay. After Elizabeth Short was killed, after the inquest, the killer took some items from her purse, addressed a little envelope with cutout letters, and sent it to the newspapers. And the envelope contained some snapshots, various business cards, that sort of thing, her so-called address book. It was all in there. That one was legit. All of the others, and there were a lot of prank letters, were probably pranks. And Black Dahlia Avenger was certainly a prank by somebody. And whoever was doing the Black Dahlia Avenger prank letters is just laughing their ass off that anybody is getting a couple of books out of it. No, the reality is only the letter with her stuff was from the killer, and that's it. Okay. Does Steve self-market himself, or does he have a marketing team that gets him on every true crime podcast or show related to Los Angeles? That is the nature of true crime. It's very repetitious. It's a big echo chamber. Well, let's get Steve Hodel. And so the nature of the true crime, which is one reason I don't want to feed the true crime beast, is that the way true crime podcasts and articles work, they go to Wikipedia, they go to the internet, and they just regurgitate what is there. The average true crime podcast, and let me point out, there are more than 200 true crime podcasts. Think about that. More than 200 true crime podcasts. I mean, it isn't just My Favorite Murder or Wine and Murder or any of this other stuff. There's countless. I mean, there's only 200 that get ranked. There's more than that. And so the nature of the true crime podcast is that they go to Wikipedia, and you have one person reading Wikipedia and the other person reacting. Oh my God. Oh, isn't that amazing? And that's how true crime podcasts work. They don't want to take the time to do any research or any original research or any work at all. It's reading the internet to you. And the average true crime podcast is somebody reading the internet to you. Sorry, but that's what it is. So yeah. Now what's interesting is Steve gets much less traction on a place like Reddit. I know Reddit. Yeah. There's a lot more skepticism and pushback on Reddit towards Steve, which is interesting. But I kind of monitor, take the pulse of the internet and see it's like, what's going on. And generally you have two camps. You have the camp that just keeps regurgitating the Steve Hodel talking points. And then you have the skeptics like on Reddit and stuff like that. But that's about it. Okay, let's see. Was there anything in Black Dahlia Avenger that was surprisingly accurate or astute? No. It's all about implicating George Hodel in as many crimes as possible. And I will point out that the whole notion of the lone woman murders, the lone woman murders was invented by Steve. That's a term that was invented by Steve Hodel. Anytime you see somebody refer to the lone woman murders, that's a Steve Hodel creation. Okay. No, there's nothing there. There are no brilliant insights. It's all very didactic and ham-fisted about how terrible his dad was and what an evil guy his dad was, and that kind of thing. Oh, that's what it all is. And so no, there aren't any brilliant insights at all. Okay, let's see. Let me go to another submitted question here. Oh, this is a good one. This is a good one. Was Elizabeth Short fed her own excrement? Okay, where does that come from? That comes from this stinker right here. Okay. The Elizabeth Short was forced to eat feces, trigger warning, comes from Severed. Okay. That's a John Gilmoreism. John Gilmore made that up. Some of the things John Gilmore got from Will Fowler, but that one is original to John Gilmore. And where did he get that? Gilmore got a copy of the inquest, the transcription of the inquest. And in that is the kind of the abbreviated version of Frederick Newbar's autopsy of Elizabeth Short. And he talks about the contents of her stomach, which is, feces and other material that couldn't be identified. Well, Steve loves the story of Elizabeth Short being forced to eat feces. He loves that story. Why is that? Because at the crime scene on Norton Avenue, there were heavy paper sacks. Now, Steve is really torn. What am I going to do? Because the newspaper articles say they were cement sacks. And so Steve has got a lot invested in, well, my dad was just having cement concrete work done at the Sowden house. So it's definitely, those were the only cement sacks in all of Los Angeles. So obviously my dad was involved in that. But he also likes the idea of Elizabeth Short being fed feces. He likes that. And so he will say, yeah, my dad also did that. And the green substance, he'll say, well, and that was perlite, because they used to put perlite in bags of steer manure. So that's what that is. And it's like, no. If Steve knew anything about gardening and landscaping, he would know that they don't put anything in steer manure. It's just a bag of steer manure. Plus, perlite is white. It's not green. Sorry. So, but, in the world of Steve Hodel, that doesn't matter. Those little picky details are unimportant. But he loves the idea of Elizabeth Short being forced to eat feces, which, no. But that's where it comes. It is from John Gilmore to Steve Hodel. Okay. Why does Steve say the entire power structure of LA would have collapsed if George was prosecuted for Black Dahlia and yet was tried for? Yeah, exactly. No, Steve's fallback plan, his fallback excuse, explanation for absolutely everything. They knew too much. George Hodel wasn't prosecuted because he knew too much. George Hodel killed Jean Spangler, or he disappeared Jean Spangler, because she knew too much. Everybody knew too much. And wow, who is Jean Spangler? Okay, Jean Spangler is famously this minor model and actress who disappeared. We don't know for real what happened to her, except that she left home and was never seen again. Is she dead? Well, one would think so, but we don't know. Anyway, George Hodel, at least in the world of Steve Hodel, was also responsible for that. Even though George had just been arrested and maybe was still in jail or maybe out, but George had to immediately in the world of Steve Hodel, immediately get out of jail for molesting Tamar so he could off Jean Spangler or disappear Jean Spangler. Why? Because she knew too much. That is the favorite explanation of Steve Hodel. His dad wasn't prosecuted because he knew too much. There was nothing done about this. And he will talk about the transcripts were in Boxy. And he's got it around to when they were listening to the bugs, there's a murder on this recording and they didn't do anything. And so they hushed it up because, they ignored this recording of this woman screaming. And it's like, again, it's the world of Steve Hodel. It really is this alternative reality. It's not real. It's weirdly fictional. So why would the entire power structure of LA collapse? It wouldn't, speaking very briefly and very quickly. There is this notion that a certain group runs Los Angeles. No, I mean, if you look at Los Angeles, it is just all over the place. You have the city, in terms of the power structure, you have the city council, you have the county supervisors, you have all these other cities within Los Angeles County. Okay. You have the city of Los Angeles, fine. And you have all these other cities. You've got Santa Monica, you've got Burbank, you've got Long Beach, you've got Pasadena, and on and on. Those are all separate cities. So it's not like there's a unified power structure. It's this sprawling mass of people. And that's what Los Angeles is really like, which is why people call it incorrectly 13 suburbs in search of a city. Because it is this huge amorphous mass. But that's another discussion. Let's see. Is there any evidence that the Black Dahlia murder was a surrealist art murder? No, absolutely not. That is also a creation of Steve Hodel. One of the things you get in here and George Hodel knew Man Ray, the surrealist photographer. There were a lot of expatriates in Los Angeles during World War II. They fled Europe, famously. The acting community, there were lots and lots and lots of actors who fled Europe, who fled the Nazis, and set up shop in Southern California. It was a particularly rich and vibrant time for the immigrant community here in Los Angeles. And Man Ray was one of them. Man Ray was a photographer. He left most of his stuff in Paris when he fled, including the photograph that Steve says, of the Minotaur. Oh, well, that was, the reality is he probably left that in Paris when he fled. But anyway, Steve has made this huge thing about his dad being very close friends with Man Ray. And, oh, God, my head hurts. Steve will say that, Man Ray introduced Elizabeth Short to George Hodel because Elizabeth Short posed for Man Ray or the other way around. And no, I mean, I got this question the other day. The supposed movie film of Elizabeth that supposedly shows Elizabeth Short on VJ Day on Hollywood Boulevard. Are you sure that's not her? Yeah, she was in Medford. We know that. There's absolutely no question that is just some random lady. But Steve wants it to be true. He wants that to be Elizabeth Short. He wants Elizabeth Short to have posed for Man Ray, regardless of the reality. And people just accept that. So no, it was not a surrealist art murder at all. Let's see. Okay. Oh, this is a long one. Okay, I'm gonna defer that question to see if I get time for it. Doesn't good research cost a good deal of time and money? Oh, yes, it does. It sure as heck does. Why do you think the media TV shows chose Steve Hodel to showcase any information on the Black Dahlia? The moment I saw those pictures he proposed, I knew his entire story would be false. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's a good 30-second elevator pitch. Retired homicide detective discovers dead dad is serial killer. Sounds great. It's not true, but it sounds great. So, and that's it. It's the path of least resistance. And now, if you go out on the internet, you'll find 90% of it is a regurgitation of Steve Hodel stuff. Because again, the vast majority of what people think they know about George Hodel comes from Steve. Steve is the source for almost everything. There is some pushback. The book by Eli Frankel that implicates Carl Balsiger doesn't talk about George Hodel at all. And the forthcoming book by William Mann that comes out in January, Mann emailed me, asked to interview me. I said no. Then he said, I've got this and this and this and this. And I think Steve Hodel's full of shit. I know George Hodel didn't do it. I'm not going to try to solve the case. So, I mean, I think with the more recent books, they're kind of moving away from the Black Dahlia Avenger franchise, I think. But I think it's the path of least resistance. Let's recycle Steve Hodel again and again, because looking at something new takes time and money and effort. So I think that's why. Oh yeah. Is Steve Hodel dealing with unhealthy issues? Oh, he for sure is. The bottom line is this, and my take on that. George Hodel had a lot of kids. Okay. It's really hard to keep track of all the different kids he had. As I said, there was this older brother, Duncan. I think there was a girl, maybe. There was Tamar, daughter from relationship number 2. Steve and his 2 brothers. And then the Philippine branch of the family. There's a lot of kids. It's hard to keep. I guarantee you, it's hard. The Hodel family tree is very complicated. But all the kids thought that dad was rich and that when he died, he would leave them a lot of money. And guess what? They didn't. I think Steve talks about it in here. My recollection, and somebody sent me the link to George Hodel's estate and all that stuff. I think the kids all got $10,000 or something like that, which, you have to remember, George Hodel's heir was his wife, his widow. She would have gotten the bulk of the estate. And what the kids, even if, let's say, even if he left the kids $1 million split up among a bunch of kids, it's not going to be that much. And so I think there was the desire to, well, if dad didn't, rich dad didn't leave me any money, I'm going to cash in on him. And I think that was originally the motivation, but I think now Steve is hooked on the attention and the acclaim. He likes to do the book signings and all that stuff. And so he likes to meet the folks. He likes to, do his dog and pony show about, here's everybody who says I solved the case, and it's all conveniently dead people. But I think it was originally money, and then Steve got hooked on the attention, and I think that's it. Yeah, I mean, I think Steve, did this as a scam to get attention, to write a best-selling book, to get interviews and make some money. But it's morphed into something else. I mean, he's self-publishing now, which is happening more and more in the publishing industry. But his book sales are, his latest books are like 2.2 millionth on Amazon. They don't sell. Nobody cares. But I think that's the deal. Okay. Take a deep breath, folks. I got a question. Was root of evil based on circumstantial evidence? Okay. What am I talking about? Root of evil. Okay. Root of Evil is a podcast. You may have heard it. It was a companion piece to a miniseries called I Am the Night that was on TNT. And I forget, I want to say it was 2012 was more, I think it was, I forget the year that it came out. But anyway, what happened was this. Tamar, poor wounded Tamar, had a daughter named Fauna. And Tamar, being the stable, grounded person that she was, handed Fauna off to a washroom attendant in Nevada. Told the washroom attendant, who was black, that Fauna was, mixed race and would eventually, someday she'll darken. And so Fauna Hodel is raised in Nevada thinking that she is mixed race and black. That's a great story. A white person growing up thinking that they're black. In this day and age, that's a great story. And so she wrote a memoir, very interesting, on her experiences, which are legitimately fascinating, all about race in America and that kind of thing. 2019. Thank you. Black Dahlia Avenger comes out. Whoop-de-doo. Fauna just takes all of Steve Hodel's claims and incorporates them into her life story, because why not? And so that's what happened. Fauna appropriates all of Steve's claims. And Tamar, remember I said there's a lot of bad blood in the Hodel family over Black Dahlia Avenger. Duncan, Steve's oldest half-brother, quit talking to Steve because he was so furious about this book. Tamar was also, I'm told by people who knew her better than I did, that she was also pissed at Steve because he used a lot of material that she was going to use for her memoir. So there's a lot of bad blood. Anyway, the Hodels all kind of glommed onto the Black Dahlia Avenger franchise. And what Fauna did was she incorporated all of Steve's claims into her life story. And she eventually sells the rights to it for a miniseries, I Am the Night. But by the time they are actually writing and producing that show, I Am the Night, she's got cancer. She's dying. And so she hands it off to her two daughters from different marriages. One is Yvette and one is Rasha. And so Yvette and Rasha, then Fauna's daughters, are involved in I Am the Night. And they are the ones who are in Root of Evil. Okay. That's how Yvette and Rasha get into Root of Evil. Okay. What is Root of Evil? Root of Evil was the podcast that was supposed to go with I Am the Night. And I will tell you right now, Root of Evil ripped off my friends because they interviewed friends of mine about George Hodel and the Black Dahlia and all that stuff. And they said, George Hodel didn't do it. No, we can't say that. We have to have George Hodel killing Elizabeth Short. And so they ripped off my friends and then froze them out. And Root of Evil was written by a guy named Zach Levitt. He scripted the whole thing based on these claims and things he fantasized. And then it was all scripted. The scripts were handed to Yvette and Rasha, and they were told what to say, and they read the script, and that was it. It's not their actual stories. It's what they were told to say. The reality is what they remember of George Hodel is little to nothing. But they were told to say what they were told. And I think they dragged in Steve for one episode. The amusing thing about Steve is even though they used all the Black Dahlia Avenger stuff, they didn't tell Steve that they were working on I Am the Night until it dropped. So he had no clue. He apparently didn't get any money from it, which I think aggravated him. But that's a story for another day. So Root of Evil is fictional. It's not based on evidence. It's what people want to be true. It is fictionally adapted from the life of Fauna Hodel, who, incorporated, Black Dahlia Avenger into her life story. So it's highly fictionalized. What Yvette and Rasha say they remember. The family always knew that. They didn't always know. No, they didn't always know. Not at all. Okay, let's see. What do you think Steve Hodel's claim that he can see his father's wristwatch in the crime scene photos? Oh, that's another great one. What am I talking about? Okay. The Black Dahlia case was sensational for its date, January 1947, and it generated a lot of public interest. And so a young man, he was a teenager, I think a young 14, something like that, found a wristwatch, a Croton wristwatch, but it was in that little park. If you're familiar with the Norton Leimert Park neighborhood, there is a little triangular park, and I think the watch was found there. It was found roughly 100 something plus yards from the Black Dahlia crime scene on Norton Avenue. Okay. So this kid finds this Croton watch. It's old, it's weathered, all that kind of thing. He goes up to the detectives and said, hey, I found this watch. And they said, yeah, okay, kid, thanks. And I don't know if they stuck it in their pocket or whatever, but the reporters got a hold of it for one day and they said, yeah, this kid found this watch down, 100 yards from the crime scene and gave it to detectives. And the kid got his name in the paper and that was that. Well, Steve has seized on that. He has decided that the watch was found at the Black Dahlia crime scene, and he has gotten to the point where he says the watch was inserted in Elizabeth Short's body. What? No. That is, again, you have to realize how much Steve Hodel is willing to fictionalize details in order to fit his theory. No, but he will tell you that. He will tell you that a watch was found, this Croton watch was found in Elizabeth Short's body. No, it was really found by a kid 100 yards away. And yeah, here's a picture of my dad wearing this military style watch. No, it's all fantasy. It is Steve world. It really is Steve world. So no, no. Can you see the wristwatch in the crime scene photos? No, that's totally a fabrication of Steve. This kid, and I forget his name, found the watch 100 yards away. No. When and why did major publishers stop giving Steve Hodel the time of day? I think I think he wore out his welcome. This was a pretty, this was published by Arcade. This was published by Perennial. I think, and let's see, Most Evil is published by Dutton. Okay. I think Steve just wore out his welcome with the publishers. I mean, his claims got crazier and crazier, frankly. And I think he is now, I think he's self-publishing. I think he's got the Thought Print Press, which is, the Thought Print is Steve's nickname for this sort of channeling that he does. It's this investigative technique that only Steve Hodel can do, and it only works with his dad. And I will leave it at that. The Thought Print is a whole nother thing. But anyway, his latest books are published by the Thought Print Press. Okay. Let's see. Do you think Fauna Hodel knew that the Black Dahlia Avenger story was? Oh yeah, I'm sure she did. Based on what people who knew her a lot better. I didn't know Fauna. I got email from either Tamar or someone claiming to be Tamar. And they were asking about, did George Hodel really do it? The Fauna Hodel story is actually very interesting. She enlisted a couple of friends of mine, I've since become friends with mine, to say, hey, these are the claims. Is there anything to them? Are there anything to Steve's claims? And they did their own pick and shovel work. They did a lot of research. They went through the Man Ray archives looking for any mention of George, all kinds of things. They did a ton of work. They really did. They worked really hard. And they went back to Fauna and said, it's all bullshit. And, she went with it anyway, which says something about Fauna Hodel. But she knew, she was told it was all BS. And I won't say more about these people, but they definitely were on a much friendlier basis with Fauna Hodel than I ever was. I did hear from someone who claimed to be Fauna Hodel 2, because there's Fauna 1 and Fauna 2. And those were not conversations that I wish to pursue at all. Okay. Did William Hirons ever say anything about Steve? He only died in 2012, and Steve wrote about him fairly often. Yeah. Who is William Hirons? William Hirons was convicted of killing Suzanne Degnan. Okay. Remember I said that Steve's worked out this theory where Elizabeth Short's body wasn't really left on Norton, it was left on Degnan. And they're the same street. What? No, I mean, that really is, you are entering the world of Steve Hodel at that point, where one street is another street to fit his theory. Hirons was a very precocious Chicago teenager who was convicted of killing this little girl, kidnapping this little girl and killing her and dismembering her and leaving various body parts in catch basins in this particular Chicago neighborhood. And Steve got on the bandwagon that it was a wrongful conviction, not because he thought it was a wrongful conviction, but because he wanted to be able to claim that his dad killed this poor little girl. And the reality is, think about it for a minute. If you're living in Los Angeles and you want to, it's like, okay, I have to find somebody named Degnan because that's the name of the street here in LA. I have to find somebody named Degnan in Chicago. I'm going to go back to Chicago, and I know they've got a little girl, and I'm going to kidnap it's like, how is that? That's humanly impossible to do that. It is humanly impossible for that to happen. And let me point out, as idiotic as that idea is, that the killing of Elizabeth Short and Suzanne Degnan are related, as stupid as that is, Steve stole that idea. Yeah, there was this crazy guy. He wrote to me using a name Jack Pico. That wasn't his name. He just called himself Jack Pico. He used a mail drop in San Diego. And he was all about looking at maps. And he had worked out this, I mean, I hate to call it a theory. It was a claim that Elizabeth Short's body was left on Norton because it triangulated to Degnan. Well, Steve just incorporated that, you know. I mean, it's one thing to steal an idea, but it's even worse to steal a stupid idea. And it really is a stupid idea. I mean, and I'm not going to give the guy's URL because it apparently it redirects to malware. I don't know. But the stuff is so crackpot. I don't want to even get into it, but that was, makes my head hurt. Was Tamar Hodel just a habitual liar, or was she really abused? As far as I can tell, Tamar was a problem child very early on. When you go through the newspaper accounts of the trial of George Hodel, and I recommend that everybody do that. All the newspapers are online. You can read all this stuff. It's there. You can read about the mom saying what a problem child Tamar had been. She was frequently claiming that men were molesting her. It was kind of her go-to pastime. And Tamar the mom eventually sent Tamar to, well, the newspapers say it's a convent. I assume it was a girls' school, a religious girl, to straighten her out. So, I mean, the mom was really at her wit's end. The mom had suffered a heart attack and finally got fed up. And if you've ever dealt with an incorrigible teenager, maybe you can understand an incorrigible teenage girl. Anyway, the mom says, I've had it. I can't deal with you. I've had a heart attack from the stress. I'm shipping you down to Los Angeles to live with your father, young lady. And I think that was the last straw for her. The mom was totally fed up. And so, you know, and I've done a whole thing on Tamar and George and the trial of George Hodel. But again, you know, Tamar gets shipped down to LA. She doesn't want to be there. She's from the Bay Area. She certainly doesn't want to be in LA. She certainly doesn't want to be living with dad. George Hodel is divorced and footloose at this point. He doesn't want an incorrigible teenage daughter around. It's the last thing in the world he wants. You know, is it any surprise that didn't work out? No one should be surprised by that at all. And so Tamar did what incorrigible teenage girls always do, which is they ran away. No one should be surprised by that. That's what incorrigible teenage girls do, is they run away from home. That's what they do. But Tamar gets picked up and she has this tale of woe, which Steve doesn't really get into all of it. Oh, I was molested by dad and 13 boys at Hollywood High School. What? 13 boys at Hollywood High School? So yeah, the cops interrogated all these boys from Hollywood High School, you know, and they all got eliminated. But George somehow got stuck into it. And the reality is that very quickly, George Hodel was doing hypnotism on a particular night. And he was doing it in the bedroom. Why would you do hypnotism in your bedroom? I don't know. Making bad decisions is not against the law. George Hodel is doing hypnotism, which was big at the time. You know, it isn't kind of like the way we look at it now. George was doing hypnotism. Tamar comes back in from a date or wherever, and she plops on the bed. Fine. There's a guy, I forget whether it's Joe Barrett or who the hell it is. It's one of the other residents of the houses on the bed, lounging on the bed, as one does when one is doing hypnotism. Well, before you know it, Tamar's making out with this guy, and she takes off her top. And George, who is doing, he finally wakes up and sees, Tamar, what are you doing with your top off, making out with this guy? And so he throws the guy out. He throws the guy out of the house. Young lady, put on your clothes and go to your room, that's what a reasonable person was doing. That's what he did. Okay. That's all in the newspaper accounts, which you don't get any of that from Steve, but that's what really happened. So yeah, that's the real story, which you will not get. And so Tamar Tamar's award, I think, ended up as a ward of the court. Dad didn't want her, and she couldn't stay with dad. And I think mom had been totally fed up with her. So yeah, she was an underage, she was underage ward of the court. I think that's what happened to her. Was George Hodel actually in San Francisco during the Zodiac murders? Well, Steve would like you to think so. George was actually in the Philippines, to the best of my knowledge. But that is not an impediment for Steve Hodel. You have to realize that in the world of Steve Hodel, George Hodel can evil genius his way to San Francisco to be Zodiac. He can evil genius his way to Chicago. He can evil genius his way to San Francisco. He never lays any of the groundwork of, here's Dad's calendar, and he doesn't do that. He just said, that could have happened. Yeah. And so that's the story of Steve and George, very briefly. And I see we're at 11 o'clock. I was going to get into, somebody asked, what's the story on Boxy? And so I was going to talk about this and the Leslie Dillon fiasco, but that is going to have to wait for another time. Okay, the hour's up. Thank you, everybody. It's been fun. I hope it was entertaining. And Black Dahlia session, first Tuesday in September, which is the 2nd. And then the next George Hodel session will be September 16th. Okay. Black Dahlia, September 2nd. George Hodel, September 16th. And we'll see you then. Thanks for coming by. Thank you. And we'll see you later. Say goodbye, Boxy. Bye.